Respond. He is risen indeed.
Oh, is
that is it. Yes.
I
was going to say hallelujah.
That could work too.
That's what I was about to say,
That
but
could
I
work
felt
too.
like you had something deeper.
It's the Baptist. No, it's the Baptist call and response for Easter. But happy Easter.
Okay.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter,
Great to be
everyone.
back.
Happy Easter, everyone at home. This is my favorite holiday because small little bunnies and chicks. So that makes
And little
it-
puppies now,
and
too.
puppies.
And
you
little
know.
puppies. So we want you to email us,
Yes.
friends@foxnews.com, all morning long. Your pictures, Easter hunt, Easter baskets, new outfits for church, whatever you got, send them in. We want to see them. But there's got to be a screenshot of Fox and Friends in the background showing that we're part of your preparation.
Yep.
Absolutely. We got a lot of news. The New York Times is finally saying maybe that dossier wasn't what it was cooked up to be, and maybe there were some problems with that. The 2020 Democrats are jumping all in on impeachment and the Mueller report. But let's first take a step back and think about this Holy Week, which basically started with a terrible tragedy in Paris, but was averted in some ways by people coming together, saving the treasures there, everything that happened at the cathedral, and now these bombings in Sri Lanka overnight, where up to 200 may be dead. This Fox News alert: churches under attack on Easter.
At least 138 people are dead after a series of explosions target churches and hotels in Sri Lanka.
Our own Trey Yingst is live at the Jerusalem Bureau with the latest. Trey,
good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Pete, Ed, Jedediah, this story is developing by the minute. Authorities in Sri Lanka say that in the past hour, 2 new blasts have occurred, this bringing the total number of attacks up to 8 earlier today. Those 6 targets killed at least 138 people, injuring hundreds more. That number is expected to rise. Now, earlier, this first round of attacks targeted 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels across the island. That, according to police, authorities say the majority of bombings happened in the capital city of Colombo. Video footage from the site of one church shows blood strewn across the pews and bodies covered with sheets. Many churches in Sri Lanka have now canceled their Easter services out of fear that another bombing could occur. Just 10 days ago, Sri Lanka's police chief warned that suicide bombers plan to hit churches across the country. His statement was reportedly based on intelligence provided by another country. As condolences pour in from around the world, Sri Lanka's president said he has given instructions to law enforcement to take every possible step to find out who carried out the attacks. So far, no group has taken responsibility. Now, guys, reports indicate that at least 35 foreign nationals were killed in these attacks. We are also getting some new information just now indicating that Sri Lanka has shut down social media sites in the country. And additionally, we are learning that a curfew has been imposed right now to try to stop other people from going into the streets and putting themselves into danger on this Easter Sunday. Ed, Jedediah, Pete.
Trey, we'll be getting back to you throughout the show.
You know, Sri Lanka fought a civil war for a very long time. The speculation, because these are suicide bombers, it's not the Tamil Tigers, the domestic insurgency they fought for a long time. This could be the work of radical Islamists. It looks like it. You know, focusing on churches on Easter.
Just the amount of devastation and sadness when any house of worship is hit on a religious holiday, I think reverberates through every nation, you know, across the globe. Everyone feels so united in just mourning in moments like this. Those are supposed to be the most sacred places that people go for safety and security and to find
for celebration, too, on Easter.
Yes, and to find celebration and peace for themselves. And it devastates me to see it.
I mentioned the terrible accident in Paris earlier in the week. Obviously, people came together. Hopefully, many around the world will come together for those in Sri Lanka.
Keep in your prayers.
Following that throughout the program. We're also looking at some politics here at home. Interesting that the New York Times seems to have woken up after a couple of years and realized that the anti-Trump dossier paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign may not have been what it was promised, and that it may have been full of what they call Russian disinformation and quote-unquote fabrication.
You don't say.
We've been reporting on for a long time.
Wow,
so they're reporting it just now. I modified this for you, Ed, this morning. It's now the finally New York Times. Okay, it took them 2 years. Yeah, it's usually the failing New York Times. Now it's the finally. This is what, here we go. Finally. Okay, this is what the New York Times reported in their newspaper just recently. They said, the release on Thursday of the report by the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III, underscored what had grown clearer for months, that while many Trump aides had welcomed contact with the Russians, some of the most sensational claims in the dossier appeared to be false. And others were impossible to prove. Mr. Mueller's report contained over a dozen passing references to the document's claims, but no overall assessment of why so much did not check
Think about
out.
how many reporters who, in some cases, have been doing excellent work in terms of figuring out what's in the investigation and what's not with Mueller at the New York Times and elsewhere. But after a couple of years, They never investigated some of this stuff. They never got to the bottom of it. Stuff that we've been talking about on Fox for a long time was unverified. It was a bunch of junk.
Yeah.
It's good, though, that they felt compelled to do so. I mean, I have to say, it is late. I mean, we can all laugh about it. 2 years. Other people have been reporting this for a really long time. It's like, welcome to the party. Nice to see that you've woken up. But I'm glad to see that they felt compelled, because that means that if the New York Times feels compelled to look into this and be honest about what happened and question what was the basis for this investigation to begin with, and that means that other liberal media outlets will probably be following suit and will say to themselves at some point, if we want to maintain any sense of credibility here, we have to start asking tough questions. We have to start being realistic about how this went down and what actually happened.
Yeah, I just worry that they're not going to investigate anything. This is their one-time quasi-mea culpa recognition, so they can check the box and then move on to whatever other investigation they're more
But
interested
now
in.
remember, there's going to be an investigation of the investigators,
That's right.
and so this kind of stuff is going to be followed up on. Here's what the New York Times lists in their story: examples of unverified claims from that dossier, claims of Trump-Putin intelligence trading, interactions with prostitutes, moles inside the DNC, use of Romanian hackers to target Democrats. Carter Page had allegedly collected a brokerage fee for the sale of a share of the Russian oil giant Rosneft, and Michael Cohen's trip to Prague. How many times did we hear about that? That all started in the dossier, never proven after all of this time. The Carter Page one strikes me particularly interesting because Carter Page has been thrown out there in the mainstream media for a few years, thrown to the wolves, frankly, by the FBI, the Justice Department.
And he
was surveilled, and
he's
he was
a
never charged with anything.
C-level, you know, quasi staffer. It's not like we're talking about the chief of staff or the campaign manager. I mean, Paul Manafort had his own issues, but they didn't have to do with Russian collusion. Yet, and we might actually get the declassification of the FISA warrant on Carter Page. So we might get a chance to actually see the unredacted version of what they trumped up, you might say, on Donald Trump.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we have great division within the Democratic Party. Some Democrats pushing for impeachment, some saying, you know, hold on a second, let's focus on the issues. Let's look at the Democrats that are backing Trump's impeachment. We have Senator Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, Representative Rashida Tlaib, Al Green, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Maxine Waters. No surprises for me there. And let's take a listen to Democrats on impeachment versus investigations and see some of that divide.
Impeach the president. Are you there yet?
I'm not there yet, but I can foresee that possibly coming.
The impeachment effort is going to only divide us further.
Essentially, impeachment is a political process. And in my view, there's an even better political process coming right down the road on almost the same time frame, and that's the elections of 2020.
The fundamental question for us is there going to be some accountability here? I have called on the House to initiate impeachment.
Do you think there should be a conversation about impeachment right now?
No. I think right now we should continue this investigation.
Let's keep investigating. Let's just keep going. Does he want to investigate the investigators, though? The idea that you're just going to keep investigating till you find something, I think Angus King is right. If it's the elections of 2020. If you want to impeach him at the ballot box. Motivate your people to do that. That to me, if you're being savvy as a Democrat at all, is what you do.
Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, by the way, said this is not the end, the Mueller report, and no collusion, no obstruction. He said it is the beginning of a new chapter. That's literally what he said. So what you're saying is investigate on and on and on forever.
The truth is, if they felt that they could impeach him, as you're saying, at the ballot box, I think that's the route they would be going. I think the fear is they're deeply worried about Trump's reelection.
I've never seen
It's hard to see him showing real strength on the way in, because what's going to happen is the wind's going to keep blowing. If he wants to go more moderate, you've got the resist liberal left wing saying, no, 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 don't give in to Trump, don't move on from the investigations. he's showing the strength that you would expect. Instead, he's showing a lot of waffling.
I think he's being pushed by the Democrat establishment, but deep down inside, I think Joe knows this is not his time. He's struggling with how to fit into the time of the Me Too movement, how to fit into the time where the Democratic Party has gone so far left, and there really doesn't seem to be room for him, and the base is not revved up about him. So I think it's a struggle right now, and he's trying to get his footing and say, well, I want to announce, but how do I do this in a way that surges me forward, and I don't have Bernie Sanders on my tail every second of the day? That
Oh, he'll
feel
be
so
there.
good.
He will be there.
We're turning to some headlines for you in the 6 a.m. hour. A zookeeper is in stable condition after being attacked by a tiger at the Topeka, Kansas Zoo. Visitors watching as the 7-year-old tiger pounced on the trainer inside an enclosed outdoor space. The animal puncturing the woman's head, neck, and back. The zoo's director says the tiger, named Sanjeev, will not be put down. The zoo closed briefly before reopening.
It is a tiger.
Police in Illinois say the parents of a missing 5-year-old boy are not cooperating with investigators. This as the FBI joins the search to find AJ Friend. The boy's parents say they last saw him Wednesday night. Police say there are no signs he was abducted. Authorities say AJ's parents have been investigated for abuse and neglect in the past. Most claims were unfounded. Actress Felicity Huffman could avoid jail time after she pleaded guilty in the college admissions scandal. The LA Times reports she could spend her recommended sentence of 4 to 10 months at home. She would have to wear an ankle monitor. Oh no, life is so hard. The actress admitted to paying a Harvard graduate $15,000 to fix her daughter's SAT score. Christians around the world are celebrating Easter today. This is a live look at the Vatican City right now as Pope Francis addresses a massive crowd following Mass, and the fire at Notre Dame forcing parishioners in Paris to hold their Easter vigil at a nearby church. And in Washington, D.C., thousands are gathering at the Lincoln Memorial right now for the sunrise service tradition. And those are your headlines.
That's beautiful.
Very cool. Happy Easter, everybody.
Easter, everybody.
All right, some establishment Stop Sanders Democrats agonizing over his momentum. The establishment roaring up. He surges in the polls in the meantime.
So are some of the Democrats burned out? Feel the burn yet? And what do Bernie supporters have to say? We'll ask one Bernie supporter. Get the inside scoop next. Democrats about to get a 2016 primary do-over, maybe, with the relaunched presidential campaign of Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders. Some establishment Stop Sanders Democrats are agonizing over his momentum, his money, as he continues to top the polls and surge in that fundraising. So what do actual Sanders supporters make of all this? Let's ask Democratic strategist and now a senior advisor to the Bernie Sanders campaign, Chuck Rosha. Good morning and happy Easter, sir.
Good morning.
So tell me, why are Democratic establishment folks so worried? We keep hearing about these secret dinners that are now not secret. Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi huddling near a tandem and all these activists. What do we do? How do we stop Bernie? Why are they so worried?
You know, I've been doing campaigns for almost 29 years, and what you've had, and I actually in both parties, if you've had this elite class of donors who've controlled all the policy, kind of controlled all the bylaws, and controlled the process. Well, Bernie Sanders operates outside of that. That's what makes his campaign so unique. He is funded by grassroots support from all over the country. We're at almost 1 million donations today from small individuals giving a little bit of money. So that takes the power away from the people who are normally used to being in power. And Ed, we both know that that ain't normally something good for folks who are in power.
Right, but there are some of these establishment Democrats, to play devil's advocate and say what they're thinking right now, is that this guy's really out on a limb on the left, Bernie Sanders, and can't grow his base. Does he really want to unite the Democratic Party or not?
That's the first thing he said when he said he was going to run for office. His first and number one goal was to beat Donald Trump. And as we travel all around the country, we're bringing new people into not the Socialist Democratic Party, but into the Democratic Party. You have to vote in the Democratic primary. We were just in South Carolina this weekend, and we had big crowds in South Carolina for Bernie Sanders. He's bringing lots of people to the party, and people are kind of running to his message about health care and education.
Well, real quick on that point, I hear from Democrats privately, is he even a Democrat? Is he registered as a Democrat in Vermont?
He's registered as a Democrat in Vermont to run for president, and he caucuses with the Democrats every single day. And he's a stalwart for the Democrats all across the country who care about the issues that we run on every single day of empowering people and taking the power back away from the billionaires and millionaires.
But he's
and giving it
filed
to
as
the
a
people.
Democrat now, but he's always been a socialist, and so that's why some Democrats are wondering whether he
You
really...
love to call him a socialist. He runs as a Democratic socialist, and you say if you're for Medicare for all, then you're a Democratic socialist.
So where is he on impeachment?
You know, I haven't had a conversation with the senator exactly about that, so I'm not ready to answer that today.
Where do you think he is on the Mueller report, at least?
I think there's a lot of information that was a wake-up call for everybody right now, and everybody's kind of taking it in and seeing what the next steps are. The report's out there. Now people have to take the report and take the findings of the report and do all the work that they need to do.
So here's the bottom line question for Bernie Sanders moving forward, which is how does he beat Donald Trump if he is the nominee? Because when I talk to Trump advisors, they say, look, if after a long drawn-out primary, 20 or so Democrats fighting it out, if a socialist, as you admitted, that's really deep down what he is. If a socialist wants to take on a capitalist, Donald Trump's going to run away with the re-election.
In Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, you have a whole class of people there that work hard every day who have been forgotten about, who voted for Donald Trump because they thought he was going to change something. Those people love Bernie Sanders. They love his message. They love Medicare for all. They want to make sure we have free tuition for public schools.
I hear you, but
we
pardon me,
see
have those folks seen the unemployment numbers? Have those folks seen the 5 million jobs created?
Have you seen the polls? People are flocking to Bernie Sanders there. People who I talk to, not everybody out there, but the folks that we're on the campaign trail with, you're going to see this. It's going to be a shock to you and a lot of other people.
All right. We're all waiting for it. 2020 is here already. Chuck Rocha, happy Easter.
Thank you, Ed.
Remember, the media spent the last 2 years pushing that Russia collusion narrative. Our next guest says, now that the Mueller report is finally out, the Attorney General was right about everything and says the left finally needs to apologize. And get this, he's a New York Times contributing writer. That is next.
This program.
Some quick Easter headlines. More trouble for Boeing as a New York Times report finds shoddy production practices of the 787 Dreamliner jet. The paper's investigation reveals a company culture that values speed over quality. Boeing is denying those allegations. It's the latest setback for the company after 2 deadly crashes involving its 737 MAX jets. And SpaceX is investigating an engine test anomaly that sent orange smoke billowing for miles in Florida. The company was testing a Crew Dragon capsule when something clearly went wrong. The Crew Dragon capsule is designed to take people to the International Space Station, and we are nominating Pete to be the first to go.
I'll do it. I'll take that nomination.
You would do it.
All right, Democrats and the media, same thing actually, spending more than 2 years pushing the Russian collusion hoax and getting it all wrong.
I think this is a potentially more dangerous situation than Watergate.
Donald Trump is afraid.
This is evidence of willingness to commit collusion.
So many connections with the Kremlin. I believe there was collusion.
Donald Trump's done. He's done. There's no question about that.
The beginning of the end.
Our next guest says Democrats and the media owe the president an apology.
Joining us now is publisher and editor of American Greatness and New York Times contributing writer Christopher Busker. Christopher, thanks for joining us this morning. So not many people get the opportunity to write an op-ed like this in the pages of the New York Times. Tell us about your argument.
Well, I think you're talking to America's least popular man today, judging by the hate mail I've gotten over the past couple of days because of this. But you know, actually, it's something I've wanted to say for a while. Something I have said for basically the past 2 years, which is that the collusion narrative, the way I put it in the piece was that this is basically just a massively multiplayer coping mechanism. This was something that people came up with because they just couldn't believe that Donald Trump was actually elected. Remember, Hillary was supposed to win. There was no possible way she couldn't win. We saw all the polling and said, you know, Hillary has a 93% chance to win, Donald Trump 7%. And so when that didn't happen, there had to be some excuse, and it always seemed to come back to the same thing, which is it had to be Russia, it had to be Vladimir Putin, and then of course there were always the headlines. Almost it seemed like every day that said, this is the end for Donald Trump. There was collusion. We're going to prove it. Mueller's going to prove it. Team Mueller on Twitter, all these things. And it turns out it just wasn't true, which is what we've been saying for the past 2 years. And having committed what I think is a massive fraud on the American public, it's time for people just to own the mistake, if it was indeed just an honest mistake, and say, I was wrong, and apologize and move on. And that's the only way I think people who say that they are journalists can regain credibility.
Christopher, you have to know that the odds of that actually happening are roughly slim to none. But do you think there will be any standout Democrats, particularly those running in 2020, who will seize the opportunity to be a little bit truthful on this, stand out from the crowd? My guess is no. Or will there be any people in media that want to maintain some credibility here and recognize that their credibility is on the line based on how they covered this from the start?
Yeah, well, I put that last paragraph in that piece. I say, it'll feel good if you just come clean, and it'll, it's good for the soul, and you'll feel better about it, and you'll regain your credibility. Not really expecting that anybody would take me up on my offer, and honestly, I think that the people who do will be few and far between. And when it comes to the 2020 Democratic candidates, I would say exactly 0 of those people will do it, because that's not where their base is. They raise money by calling Donald Trump names, saying that he colluded, saying impeach Trump, and so it's not in their interest to come clean and tell the truth.
Right.
So you said you got a lot of hate mail, maybe the most anyone's gotten in a while. What's the major response? Are you lying in their minds?
The major response is it's sort of like they go to the plan B. It's, well, it doesn't say collusion, but it didn't say he didn't collude, which is I don't know how to process that. It's this is, yeah, right, but if he had colluded, they would have said that. And so it's I feel like this is the 6 stages of grief, and people are trying to who invested so much time and effort and mental capacity in this are trying to figure out, okay, what's next.
Yeah, no, Christopher, good for you.
Yeah, I think your dilemma and how to process that is the dilemma that most people around the country are having right now, saying, hold on a second. So appreciate your input. Thanks so much for being here.
Great stuff.
Yep.
Oh, to have a slot like that in the New York Times opinion page. Good for him.
It's great stuff.
All right, well, coming up, Kim Kardashian worked with President Trump to free someone from prison.
Up next, what the celebrity superstar is saying to haters about working with the White House and why she has no plans to stop.
We are back with a Fox News alert. Churches under attack on Easter. At least 138 people are killed and nearly 500 others are hurt after a series of explosions in Sri Lanka.
2 new blasts within just the last few hours. The initial wave targeted 3 churches during Easter Sunday services.
At least 2 are believed to be carried out by suicide bombers. No group has taken responsibility.
Let's bring in Reverend Gerald Murray of the Archdiocese of New York. Reverend, thanks for being here this morning. Happy Easter.
Happy
Easter.
Thank you. Happy Easter, everyone.
Somber news, though, and a reminder that Christians targeted around the world.
This really hits home. Easter Sunday Mass, churches targeted, people killed while they're worshiping God. It really hits my soul here to see this. I'm going to have Mass at 11 this morning. Had absolutely no thought that anybody would come in and bomb my church, but that's what happened in Sri Lanka. So we're going to pray for those people and pray that they can, find healing and support among the survivors and bury the dead. But it's very, very sad.
Yeah, so many people in my family and families around the country and countries worldwide look to church as a sacred place where they find peace, where they feel they can find safety. So when something like this happens, I think it shakes through all of us. Despite this horrific news, what is your hope that people will remember on this Easter Sunday and learn from Easter?
Yes, no, Easter is Christ's triumph over sin and death. So even those people killed today, they have the hope of eternal life. And that really is the whole story. What we see around us is important, but the life of heaven, that's really what's important. Now, Christ came into the world as the Prince of Peace, so we pray that his followers will respond in love. But on the other hand, we have to remember evil brought Christ to the cross. So when he died on the cross, he asked us to bear our own crosses. And this is a sad cross they're bearing in Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. And I don't want to just dwell on polls because this is Easter Sunday and we've got a much bigger message. But there's a poll from Gallup that caught our eye because it sort of plays into sort of what role does faith play right now in American life. And it suggests that faith is losing its influence on American life. 78% say it's losing influence. 19% say it's actually increasing right now. How do you turn that around?
Well, the job of the priests and the church is to proclaim Christ. So I think that's what we try to do. Now, how we do that in the modern scene, it becomes a little more difficult because people don't come to the church buildings, so we have to appeal to them in many ways. But I think one of the most outstanding things we can tell is to people is, if you are a practicing Catholic or a Christian, live your faith with joy, be charitable, believe in the doctrine with firmness, and then people come to you with questions and answer them. You know, one thing I always think about is that most people won't ask me religious questions. They'll talk to their lay friends. And if people say, look, I believe this, I believe Jesus rose from the dead, and this is why I believe it, it'll have an influence.
Help in practical ways. How do we get past the Easter Bunny? Easter Bunny's great, but it's a secular reflection of a holy day. What can you do with kids and others to sort of connect the meaning of this day?
Well, explain to them what happened in Jerusalem, that Jesus died on Friday, and on Sunday morning he rose from the dead, and then he appeared to his disciples, he appeared to the holy women. You know, tell the story of Easter and explain it, because Easter bunnies are great. I was a kid. We all were. I love the chocolates, you know. But the Easter bunny is just a symbol of life. Christ is life, and the life of Christ was real. It's true. But kids need to know the story. Kids love details, you know, so you tell the story, the garments were cast aside, the holy women came, the angels told them that the Lord had risen. Peter and John went to the tomb. People didn't initially believe, then they believed. You know, read that gospel story to them and show them that, in fact, not only is this written down, this is really written in our hearts.
Very well said.
Great
Thank you.
message.
The Reverend, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
being
Thank you.
on this.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
You got it.
We've got some headlines for you now. The FBI arrests the leader of an armed militia group that stops undocumented migrants at the southern border. Larry Hopkins was taken into custody in New Mexico and charged with being a felon in possession of a gun. The controversial group says it detains illegal immigrants until law enforcement can arrive. A spokesman blamed the arrest on political pressure. It takes a pair of bold crooks just 30 seconds to steal $100,000 worth of jewelry from a Georgia mall. The suspects posing as customers before surveillance video shows one of them pull out a hammer and smash a glass case. They both then grab trays of jewelry and run. Police are still searching for them. And parents are suing their son's former prep school, claiming he got expelled for his conservative beliefs. They're accusing Connecticut's Cheshire Academy of discrimination, saying their son was kicked out for sharing his political views during an English class. School officials say the 16-year-old was not expelled over his beliefs and that he had several chances to follow the code of conduct. And Kim Kardashian West is sharing more about her work with President Trump on prison reform.
People would say to me, don't go to the White House, your career will be over. I guarantee you the people sitting behind bars do not care who the president is. They just want that relief.
Kardashian worked with the president to commute the sentence of first-time nonviolent drug offender Alice Johnson last year. Those are your headlines.
Well,
I'm sure she took a lot of heat for that, Kim Kardashian.
I love on the banner it said Kim Kardashian West, celebrity.
Like we don't know who she is. All the world knows who Kim Kardashian is.
It's a hard turn from Reverend Murray to Kim Kardashian, but, you know, we made it.
Yeah, we did it.
We did it. It's one of those Sunday mornings. Adam Klotz, how you doing?
An even harder turn from Kim Kardashian to Adam Klotz.
I wasn't going to say it, Adam, but you did. So.
Celebrity weatherman.
we need something to be put underneath my name. Nobody knows.
Celebrity works for you.
Well, at least I have a good forecast here for Easter Sunday, at least for much of the country. We're looking at really beautiful weather. That big storm that we tracked over the last several days, we're getting at the very tail end of that, so maybe a little bit of rain still lingering across portions of New England, but it's really going to be clearing off on the backside of this system. So besides just a couple of those slight showers, we're looking at mostly sunny conditions across the south, warmer temperatures here for your Easter Sunday, a little bit of snow in the mountains, and then, of course, a little bit of rain across the upper Midwest, but those are small areas considering that much of the country is looking at a really nice-looking Sunday. Current temperatures in the middle of the country, 61 degrees currently in Kansas City, still a little bit cool side on the East Coast, 47 degrees here into Atlanta, and there's your forecasted highs on the day. 73 degrees in Minneapolis, 75 degrees in Chicago. It is warm. It is beautiful in the middle of the country, guys. A really nice looking Easter Sunday. So
through
that's a little bunny.
Yeah, why is
bunny.
the bunny's in Mexico? When's the Easter bunny coming up to the States?
He can't. We don't let that happen.
We built a wall.
Okay.
How do you feel?
You set that up. I didn't want to say that.
How you feeling the day after?
How do you feel on the day after?
The day after the loss yesterday.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
the arm wrestling.
I won.
Well, you were about to go down hard.
I won.
Charles
What you're
Payne.
talking about.
Charles Payne
Charles
with
Payne
an
is-
Easter miracle for you.
His shoulder a little sore.
I mean, like,
No, I was taunting you.
there's a lot to break down about this.
I was
For one,
taunting
he's like
you.
pulling me on his side of the table.
Not only
I'm,
was I
like, all
taking your
stretched
arm, I
out
was taking
awkward.
your whole body with me.
Man, this guy can't just be gracious and
No.
He's
No.
gotta-
Can we free the
Gotta
Easter
rub
bunny,
it in.
please? Can we get the bunny
No, look at the. It's okay.
I'll
He's
move
on
it
his
for the next
way.
into America for
Yeah,
the next one?
I'll get
Okay.
it.
Thank you.
Oh,
All right,
Adam, appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.
Facial recognition technology. It's one of the FBI's newest crime-fighting tools.
But is using it an invasion of privacy? And is it a slippery slope to a surveillance state? We debate that coming up next.
And Senator Kirsten Gillibrand hits the bar with drag queens, not making that up, while campaigning in Iowa. The 2020 Democratic presidential candidate posting these pictures on Twitter, thanking the group for inviting her to their show. Huh. And President Trump is firing back at Mitt Romney. We talked about this yesterday. The Utah senator said he was sickened by the president after reading the Mueller report. Well, the president tweeted, quote, if Mitt Romney spent the same energy fighting Barack Obama as he does fighting Donald Trump, he could have won the race. Maybe. Pete?
Maybe. All right, new concerns this morning over the FBI's new crime-fighting tool, facial recognition technology. It compares faces of suspected criminals to their government-issued IDs. Critics say it violates the privacy of average Americans. A report finding most of the 411 million photos in the FBI's database belong to law-abiding citizens. They probably got my face and yours. The FBI also hasn't implemented policy changes to meet the Justice Department's privacy and accuracy standards set by the Government Accountability Office. So, is this facial recognition technology an important law enforcement tool or a slippery slope? Here to discuss, U.S. Army veteran and former NYPD officer Darren Porcher and Associate Fellow at Technology and National Security Program, Kara Frederick. Thank you both for being here this morning. Darren, let's go ladies first on this Easter. Kara, I'll start with you. Law-abiding citizens in this database, a lot of people will look at this and say it feels like Big Brother.
Definitely. And first of all, thanks for having me. Happy
Of course,
Easter.
thank you.
And
Happy Easter.
Darren, thanks for being here as well. So I think what's really important is that you have to first distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate uses of this technology. So there are definitely ways that it could be a security boon, right? So identifying the Capitol Gazette shooter in Maryland in 2018, that's a great legitimate use of this technology. But the problem is the slippery slope comes into play with two things that are going to impact the way this technology is used. This technology is getting cheaper and more ubiquitous. Just last month, the New York Times built a facial recognition machine for under $60, and they detected over 2,700 faces in 9 hours in a small subset of Manhattan. And then secondly, there's AI-optimized chips that are really going to enable facial recognition and object recognition to be utilized in smaller devices. So it's pretty much going to be everywhere.
Yeah, Darren, if this is everywhere, it's going to be open, I would think, to abuse.
Yes and no. You got to look at the seismic shift in technological advancements in law enforcement. This is kind of the wave of the future. And one of the things that people will tout with this is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from frivolous intrusions from law enforcement. I got that. But the truth of the matter is, I can speak from being a practitioner. I've used facial recognition on many occasions, and it has enhanced investigations. And this is really the pathway that we're moving in law enforcement. So when we go back to just the average citizen in a place like New York City, they're photographed of roughly 100 to 200 times a day. And so this data is being encapsulated and given to law enforcement agencies and even independents. So therefore, as we move forward, this is where we are,
Darren,
and I don't see us going back.
Do you feel like it's being safeguarded well enough? You're a good cop. I trust you would use it the right way. Are the safeguards in place to make sure somebody who has nefarious intentions doesn't get a chance to use it?
Well, the safeguards from an external perspective are very difficult to assess. But the safeguards from an internal perspective, when I say internal, I'm referring to the FBI. I believe that they're sound. And I believe the FBI is utilizing sound practices to safeguard that information moving forward.
All right, Kara, you know, we've heard a lot about the FBI as it pertains to folks at the top using their powerful positions, it looks like, for their own purposes. Could this be used by the FBI in ways that average citizens wouldn't like?
So I think the question is less, the intent of the programmers and more the mistakes that the machines can make. So the question of bias has been raised pretty publicly, especially in terms of facial recognition's ability to identify female and minority faces. These systems aren't perfect, and sometimes the risk of deploying them when they're not yet reliable, when the algorithms haven't been perfected, the societal implications that can have sort of outweigh the security risks or stand to outweigh the security risks in that regard. And I think it's also very important to look at what's happening outside of our borders with regard to the use of facial recognition surveillance technology. I mean, look no further than Xinjiang in China, where the Uyghur minorities are virtually living under a digital surveillance state, where it's a lab to sort of test these technologies. I mean, we have to pay attention with the way this technology is being used outside the U.S. in order to determine how we use it here as well.
Darren, very briefly, last word, is my face in your database?
Unfortunately, your face is not in my database. No, it could be. When we look at the governmental information that's in place, such as driver's license information, passport information, true, that information is in a database, but it's being used for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons. And that's what we need to focus on moving forward.
Darren Porcher, Kara Frederick, thank you very much, and happy Easter to you both. Appreciate it.
Happy Easter to you too. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, coming up, following the heartbreak in Paris and the destruction of the Notre Dame Cathedral, a pledge to fund a major rebuilding of the church. But this morning, why are protesters taking to the streets to stop it? Susan Lee breaks down the growing outrage in the City of Lights. Coming up next. Where is she? There she is.
Well, the tragic fire at Notre Dame Cathedral not only ravaging a French landmark, but bringing class warfare to the streets of Paris, really.
Thousands of Yellow Vest protesters flooding the streets and turning violent, angered by the nearly $1 billion raised to rebuild the Cathedral of Notre Dame, while their calls to help the country's lower middle classes seem to go unanswered.
Here with more is Fox Business Network, Susan Lee. Susan, always a pleasure to have you here.
Yes.
So break this down for us, what's going on right now.
So you would think that after the horrible fire at Notre Dame, which has been historically the country's place of worship, that it would be a unifying event for France. Not the case. Some would say that the $1 billion in donations from the country's wealthiest, the owners of L'Oreal, of Gucci, of Louis Vuitton, that would be a great thing for the country. What really angered the protesters, though, was that the tax deductions that were involved with these charitable donations. So anything €1,000 and below, 70% tax deductible. Anything above that, 60% deductible. And it really angered the unions that the richest people in France and the biggest companies were willing to open their pocketbooks, but not to help the middle class. So that helped galvanize the Yellow Vest protests, which have been going on for 23 weeks now. And they are really angry at what they see as an elitist in the presidential office, who are up to help the rich and the wealthy, but not to help the
You would
poor.
think people coming together
Yeah.
and trying to rebuild and bringing money to the table would be a good thing.
Yeah, you would think so. But I would say that Emmanuel Macron, in fact, he had to cancel that address on Monday because of the Notre Dame fire. He was going to announce new measures to help the middle class and maybe alleviate the protesters. And he has a really tough job right now. He has one of the highest debt levels in the developed world at 97% of GDP. He has a lot of social welfare programs to pay for. Only 3 countries in the world pay more than France. 3 countries, and that's Belgium, Denmark, and Sweden. And also, he has a very high unemployment rate to deal with at 9%, which has been stuck there for many years, but he doesn't have control of his monetary policy. He's in the euro, so other people control where the currency goes and interest rates. He has no control over that. So the only levers he has are taxes and spending. And so recently when he got into office, he basically cut the wealth tax, increased the gas tax, which some saw as benefiting the rich, but killing the poor, right?
Yep.
And also he made it easier to hire and fire, which traditionally in France, people have been, very relaxed, shall we say,
And he was
secure
lecturing
in their
President Trump a
jobs.
few months ago.
Right.
Remember that?
Yeah. So, he has a pretty tough position to grapple with right now.
Yeah, when you give up your sovereignty to an international body or to a European body,
right,
you can't make every decision you need to make for your country.
No, you cannot. And, I would have to say that the wealthy, from what I see, average incomes have doubled over the last 20 years. It's gone only up a quarter for the middle and the lower class. But, income inequality is actually, it's lower in France than here in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. So a lot of people are saying, what are you complaining about? Let's just unify and rebuild Notre Dame.
More free stuff.
Great information. By the way, I noticed you enunciated Louis Vuitton and all of it.
Oh, yes.
Very, very well.
Gucci, familiar.
Happy Easter. All right. Some are saying President Trump should move on and focus on his legislative agenda now that the Mueller report is out. But should he? Or should he demand answers on how this whole thing started? We discuss about the investigation of the investigators next.